We want to bring in our political analyst, Stephen Maynard Caliendo, to talk more about that Senate race. Lots to talk about here. Stephen, thanks for waking up with us for a second morning in a row.
Sure.
We appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Let's pick up where Darius left off and talk about Stratton's projected win, at least in the Senate primary. A lot of Chicago help and day of voting help. Are those two factors key to her win?
A lot of Pritzker help is a big factor there too. I mean, I think one of the things that we can take from last night is that money matters, but it is not the only thing that matters. And so I think that when you start to weigh the importance of J.B. Pritzker's voice and stamp, I think that's where it matters.
Can I really quickly ask
Absolutely.
you, were you surprised by the margin of the projected win, though? Because it had been, she'd been closing the
That's
gap.
right.
He was in the lead, and then suddenly she wins by, what, 7-8 points?
Yeah, I think, and that's where the polls were accurate, I think, the whole way through, and it was largely because Raja was in the race so early and so much. And I think if you ask regular folks on the street, who did you see more ads from, they're still going to probably say Raja because they've been thinking about him for so long. But toward the end there was a push, and then again, I think it was the J.B. Pritzker stamp that really made a difference.
I was going to ask, what do you think did it?
I think it was that. I think it was that, and I look. It's very clear at this point that J.B. Pritzker has captured the imagination of the Illinois populace, and so he didn't get involved in very many races. He only got involved in 2, I think, but this one was the most important one, and it wasn't without controversy. I mean, there were folks. The Congressional Black Caucus, for instance, was not happy that he had been so heavy-handed in terms of his endorsement of Juliana Stratton, even though they can understand why. They wanted to see a little bit more of an open primary, and sometimes that happens. That elected officials stay away. But you saw also in the Danny Davis race and some other places where there was a shoulder tap. Certainly Chuy Garcia is the most obvious place that there was a shoulder tap. Yeah. Right, exactly. And so picking one successor is not without precedent, especially in U.S. House races, particularly in majority-minority districts. There's a long history there.
Let's talk about the Republican side now of the Senate primary. Don Tracy, former head of the GOP party in Illinois. He has aligned himself with Donald Trump in many ways. How is that shaping up in your mind? Is it going to be even a contest at all, or absolutely not?
I don't think it'll be much of a contest. I think it's going to be determined by what happens in the summer, how the war goes, how the economy goes. If Donald Trump looks like he's going to be an albatross, then I think then there's going to have to be some separation there. The other question is going to be whether the National Republican Party wants to spend any money to try to flip this seat. My guess is that their money will be better spent elsewhere, trying to hold on to seats that they're afraid that they may lose. Texas is a place that I might point to.
You mentioned Governor Pritzker really helping out with Juliana Stratton being the projected winner in that race, but let's talk about the governor's race, because now you have a rematch coming up between Darren Bailey and Governor Pritzker. I think Pritzker won by about 13 points last time. What are you thinking about this race?
Yeah, I think it was 500,000 votes. It wasn't very close. It's a different context. It was right after COVID the last time, and there was a lot of, for all the folks who were very happy with the way Governor Pritzker turned out to be a national leader with respect to COVID, there were a lot of folks, particularly downstate, who were upset about how aggressive he was in terms of pulling us back. This is a completely different world, and I think Darren Bailey is going to have some decisions to make too in terms of how closely he aligns himself with President Trump, with the National Republican Party, with the kind of policies that that they've been advocating. Certainly, we know that J.B. Pritzker is going to leverage his criticism of Donald Trump to his advantage.
I have to ask you quickly, what specifically do you think Darren Bailey has to do differently to try to even close any sort of gap in November? I
don't think there's anything he could do. In other words, he is who he is. I think if anything, he's a more sympathetic character. He suffered a tremendous family tragedy in between the last time he ran and now. He has the kind of a way of connecting with people that is very powerful. You've met him in person. He's a lovely person. But I think that if it comes down to policies, especially in a state like Illinois, which is solidly blue, the Republican policies are just losers electorally right now. In states like Illinois. It doesn't mean that they're losers nationwide, but we're going to see probably a very big swing in the House of Representatives nationally. Democrats taking control, and the Senate might flip as well. So he's, even in a governor's race, while that's separate from what's happening nationally, there's going to be headwinds for sure for Darren Bailey.
Well, there's so much more to talk about. That was just 2 races. So, Stephen, stick with us.
Bring back our political analyst, Stephen Maynard Caliendo, a dean and professor, of course, too, at North Central College. Stephen, Schakowsky's held that seat for, almost 30 years.
That's right.
A very, very long time. What do these results potentially mean for the direction of that district? Is Biss even more, if you will, progressive than Schakowsky, or maybe
a little bit, although not as progressive as Kat Abigazela. And I think that was the race actually that I was the most interested in, because it's hard to disentangle the fact that she sort of just showed up recently, and that was a big part of the campaign, is she wasn't really from the district and she just kind of plopped down there. But I'm also interested in the kind of Zohran Mamdani kind of young progressive, feels like they want to talk very directly as opposed to in political speak, which can, people say they don't like political speak, but it works, and it's a way to sort of soften, so I'm really interested in the way this generational divide is happening. So that race was really important, and then of course we saw the other speeches of folks who may be in those seats for a very long time.
And speaking of that, we were talking about the 7th district, and that's where LaShawn Ford is a projected winner there to take the seat of Danny Davis, who endorsed Ford for this. How much do you think that endorsement played into this, him beating particularly Melissa Conyers-Ervin?
Yeah, I think it was a really important part of it. We mentioned in the last segment that sometimes in these districts that are majority minority districts and that you have long time serving, particularly African-American members of Congress, the shoulder tapping is very much a common thing. I will say that another thing that's hard to disentangle on Melissa Conyers-Ervin's is that how much people might have been frustrated that she ran against him when he wasn't ready to step down last time. So in other words, against Danny Davis. In other words, there's an unspoken sort of norm that you let your elders do their thing, and when they're ready to go, they go, and sometimes they'll shoulder tap somebody. But running against him while he was still running, Danny Davis when he ran again, I think that may have been an issue for a lot of folks.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's move to the 2nd congressional district now for the Democratic primary. Obviously, Cook County Commissioner Donna Miller, the projected winner there to fill Robin Kelly's seat, who of course unsuccessfully ran for the Democratic Senate nominee position. She beat out Jesse Jackson Jr. for the race. As you can see, she handily beat him there. Is there anything about those results that surprised you? And her comment that we just heard, I represent the future. People didn't want to look at, go to the past. I mean, that was a direct dig at Jesse Jackson.
There's no question it was. And it was running against a legacy, running against a powerful name, of course, in Chicago politics, but a name that comes with a lot of baggage. Jesse Jackson Jr., of course, had that seat and then that faced federal charges and so forth. And so I think there was some thought about, well, with the passing of his father, would there be a little bit of momentum there on Election Day? Remember, a lot of people vote early. Some people voted before the Reverend passed at all. But also, there was a lot more money spent. Donna Miller had more money. She was very well known, former head of Planned Parenthood, and she just ran a campaign that was really focused on the future, as she said, and that helped her prevail.
So next, we're going to look at some results for the Cook County Assessor's race.
Sure.
That was a big one this time around. Incumbent Fritz Kagi lost to challenger Pat Hines. The Assessor's Office appraises real estate we know in Cook County, determining its value, and in turn, its share of the county's tax burden. And we know that a big part of that job means determining property taxes. They have been skyrocketing property taxes. How much do you think that played? And maybe even just the emotional
Absolutely.
vote.
Look, first of all, who wants this job? What are we talking about here? Why did anybody run for this position? This is terrible. And I think that Fritz Kagi was in this position, I think, 8 years ago when he won the first time, where the Democratic Party did not endorse him. And that was certainly what happened this time, too. He's an incumbent, but the Democratic Party in Cook County didn't endorse him, and he ended up losing. There's no question, Audrina, that when you talk about taxes, especially when people are feeling economic pinch in all areas, not only in the taxes, but it was coming all over, that you're going to punish somebody who has a title that reflects that. Even if you don't know exactly what an assessor does, you know it has something to do with your taxes, and you know you're not real happy about that. So he had an uphill battle for sure on a number of fronts.
But yet it was still a pretty close race.
It was a close race. Yeah.
Closest of all.
That's true. That's right.
Night,
well, other than the ones that we haven't called yet, but that's right.
Well,
that's
right.
That's right.
Yeah, of course.
The ones that are settled, yeah.
Right. One last question. I think we have to talk about voter turnout. Yesterday morning, we were saying, hey, look, early voting totals are up compared to years primaries past. But, we know more than 396,000 people voted in Chicago, but it's only 26%. 26% of Chicago's nearly 1.5 million registered voters. First of all, are you surprised by, this is not new, but are you surprised by that? And what could this mean for the general election turnout?
I am embarrassed about yesterday. I was so celebratory that we were going to have this big turnout. And what we found out happening was it wasn't that more people, it was just that more people voted early or more people voted by mail. And so the convenience of voting in those other forums, especially on a day that's super cold, that never helps election turnout when you have a cold day. But what I had hoped was that those in-person numbers would hold and they'd be bolstered by. It's disappointing. It's disappointing. Look, these are, especially when you're talking about primary races that are really going to be determinative of who ends up in office. And that's, for the most part, that's what's happening here. I don't want to dismiss what we're going to be facing throughout the summer and the challenges we'll have from Republicans. But the truth of the matter is that most of these races were decided yesterday. And for 3 out of 4 Chicagoans to stay home, or Illinoisans, excuse me, to stay home is problematic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in voter turnout in 26%.
Well, democracy's on the ballot, and look, we know that we have sort of authoritarian strands coming not just here, but in Europe and other places, and so democracy is more important than ever. These are the times we have to step up and show it. It's not a spectator sport.
Stephen, thank you so much again for joining us. We'll catch up with you in the next hour. Again, still so much to talk about as we're getting results in.